Ladies and gentlemen, what's going on? We are back. We got episode number 110 of the Club and Sub podcast. This week, we're going to be breaking down. Is it UFC Fight Night 62? Is that right? Or is it 61? 62? We got UFC Fight Night 62. We have another all female main event here. I actually think this one has like a little bit more juice on paper in terms of entertainment value between Alexa Grasso, Viviane Araujo. As usual, we're going to be brought to you guys by BetOnline.ag for $1,000 bonus for a 50% bonus up to your first $1,000 deposit. Use the promo code CLUBSUB. Tonight you got me back, John, on Twitter, MMA Fox. I've had a bit going on lately, but I'm back. You're back in full swing here. We got Luke at SW_betting and Lags at Danny_Lags. Yeah, we're gonna take you through this card. I don't honestly, from a watchability standpoint, it should have some fun fights on it. I don't have a ton bet wise, not a lot of dogs I'm really looking to hunt out here, to be honest. But I mean, I'm excited. You know, there's a lot of like pretty fun fights here. Lags, what are your thoughts on the card?
Yeah, to be completely honest, again, I think there's a ton of violence. I love a lot of unders on this card. Other than that, I don't think there's a ton of money lines that I love personally.
Luke, how about yourself?
Yeah, I don't really know why people are shitting on this card. I think it's a really fun card. Like even the main event, I know I'm more apt to enjoy WMMA than most people are. But I mean, on paper, none of those girls are ever in boring fights. Like they're always in fun fights. So I don't know why people are shitting on it. I think it's a fun card.
Yeah, I agree. For your kind of run of the mill fight night, it's certainly better than some of the stuff that's been trotted out to us the last couple months for fight nights. Again, maybe not the best for betting, but we're gonna hop right into it though. First fight of the night, we got Pete Rodriguez. He is taking on Mike Jackson, coming off a DQ victory against Dean Barry. He's a huge dog again here. Lags, what do you think? Is he worth going after again?
No, pretty much props to anybody that got the under 1.5 an early number. I think Rodriguez probably kills him early. Nothing really much to add on to that.
Luke, how about you?
Yeah, I don't really even want to talk about it, to be honest. I mean, the one thing I guess you can say for Rodriguez, I mean, at least the guy does have an extensive amateur career, even though all of those fights end early. He at least has more general fights, I guess. We obviously saw Gall, Starch, Jackson. I know he's club and sub, but still Mickey Gall's not a phenomenal striker by any means. And then even he evaded a lot of the shots of Barry, but he was still significantly hurt twice within 5 minutes against a guy who's going to come forward and throw heat. So I kind of see it honestly playing out similarly in the sense that Rodriguez is actually pretty small at 170. So I think Jackson probably actually does make him miss a little bit, but I think it's probably going to just take one big bomb. And I think Jackson probably folds up and goes home. But I think he's probably going to take that similar game plan of him just trying to evade the strikes, extend the fight, which is why I would have some hesitation with laying a super chalky price on the under 1.5, because I think Jackson might just run from him for 5 minutes. And usually if I'm laying, super heavy prices on, under 1.5, so I'd like a little bit more committal from both guys. But like I said, I think the guy's still fragile at the end of the day. So to Lags' point, I think if you got an earlier number on it, I don't hate it. And it's probably the best way to go for the fight. Cause I think even the round one prop for Rodriguez is favorite money. I think the last time I looked, it's like you can't
big favorite or minus 125,
160.
Oh wow, it's up.
Yeah, round one's 160.
You can't be laying that on a fucking round prop. Like you just can't do it.
So. I'm not going to do it, but like, I almost want to just bet than not, Like I plus money that one fighter does not finish in the first round, I agree with you though. Honestly, I literally Pete Rodriguez against any fighter on the roster, I'd be trying to make a compelling case for betting the plus 500, except Mike Jackson pretty much. Look, I don't really have a lot to say about the fight beyond what you guys said. I think the only thing I'll add that I thought was interesting, I saw Brandon Olivas tweet yesterday, the day before, and I think he's a Kraus guy. He tweeted that he fought one of Jackson's teammates, or not Jackson, sorry, Rodriguez's teammates a couple weeks ago, and that camp's just not serious at all. He claimed the coach was drunk during the fight and drinking during the fight. He did make a good point that Rodriguez has never fought past 2.5 minutes. I guess that's just the only thing I'll put out there. Only thing I'd say is, it is true Rodriguez has never been extended in a fight. If you're interested in the Jackson side, why not just see Rodriguez? We know is going to come out hot. See if he can survive the storm and go live. There's no real reason to think Jackson should survive here, and so no reason to get involved pre. Um, Moving on, though, way better fight here. We got TJ Ferrara. He's taking on Tatsuro Taira, coming off a victory in his debut against Carlos Candelario. Luke, what do you think?
I think I've seen a healthy amount of people bet Vergara this week, and I definitely get it from the perspective that, he is a reasonably tough guy. He's going to push a pace in the events he's been able to get on top. He's been able to control some positions. I mean, he kind of does check the boxes of a dog who's going to go out there and fight for your money at like plus 190. So I definitely get it. But ultimately, why I'm not doing it personally is because I think Taira's just a much better grappler than he is. Obviously, Vergara's takedown defense and get-up game has looked decent, but I think it's more like transitionally for Taira, where he doesn't even necessarily need like a full-fledged regular takedown. I just think his chains to the back are so good where he can probably just lock down a body triangle. And then on the feet, I mean, he's low, like uber low volume, which is ultimately why I still to this day, even though I rate him reasonably high, or at least in relation to where he is at this point in his career as a grappler, like you can't trust him to go out there and win like overt minutes really at all based on what we have so far. So it's kind of hard to pony up that price for him. What I do think is interesting from a betting perspective, though, is like Taira inside the distance at like plus 240. I think that's probably a decent way to buy down. I think all three fights for both guys in the UFC so far have went to decisions. So I think that's why you're seeing that. But I do think he's going to have opportunities to sub. We've obviously seen Vergara, despite his, general toughness, he's been hurt, in multiple fights. We've seen this Taira guy show some pop in that right hand to drop guys. Obviously, Vergara's hurt a bunch of guys too. So I think we could see some chaos here. And I think there's finish merit here. So if anything, I would look more to, I guess, go against the market grain and go with violence in some capacity.
Yeah, I don't mind violence here, to be honest. Honestly, and I'm going to say this a lot tonight. I'm sorry for any Team Targaryen fans here. I'm going to probably disappoint compared to my normal approach with this card. Don't like many dogs this week. And honestly, everything I do like is pretty much the same thing. Team of favorite with a dominant grappling edge. Look, I haven't bet Taira primarily for a lot of the reasons you mentioned, Luke. And I think there are still a fair amount of questions about, what this guy's upside is. But I've thought about it. And honestly, if the line came in at all, I might. I kind of personally believe from a market perspective, if you look at Vergara, he was priced plus 330 against Clayton Rodriguez. And, Rodriguez, he was a highly touted prospect, but not really an overt grappler. And I think, or I'm assuming the takes on the Vergara side are based on the fact that he survived reasonably well with Rodriguez. The thing is, even in that fight, you touched on it, Luke, he gave up a lot of dominant positions in that fight, got his back taken for a couple minutes. Every time I've seen this guy take down, I've seen him get past. I kind of think the reason his get-up game is being interpreted as being good is less because he has a good get-up game than people are seeing him get up, and he's not fighting guys who are shutting it down there. I kind of think if Taira gets on top of him, he's going to wreck him here. Pretty confident he can mount him, get to the back. Vergara could hold his own there. And I have the same concerns as Luke does regarding the low-volume nature of Taira on the feet. But even that, Vergara is one of these guys. He's this pressure go forward guy who you don't even need that much skill to kind of hit and avoid, And so I look at it and it's like the best case for Vergara is he can keep this vertical for 7 or 8 minutes. And I don't even know if I can see that. I think I agree with Luke. I think violence is interesting here. I think the Taira ITD is interesting here. Personally, I think if he gets on top of him, he's going to absolutely maul him. Candelario is a much better grappler and a much better wrestler than CJ Vergara is. Again, I haven't bet Taira, but I'm honestly considering it. And like a better number, I might do it. Lags, what do you think?
Not a ton to add, but you mentioned it a little bit with the Rodriguez fight. But the big thing, I think a lot of people were taking from that fight, though, it's like Rodriguez did end up gassing. So, I mean, he had him in a lot of bad positions, but Again, a guy with Tyra who I think has pretty good cardio, solid grappling as well. I think should be no issue for him. Yeah, I'm going to round out the trio here.
And real quick, too, on that point of the cardio, I think that is important to note. I mean, we saw also, in the Osborne fight, right? Osborne slowed down halfway through. That's when Vergara's upside came. Even if you go back to his regional fight against Jacob Silva, I mean, Jacob Silva had him in real deep shit early, but Jacob Silva death gassed and he took over the fight. So he's one of those guys, like, if you slow down on him, he's going to turn up. And like I said, historically, in many scenarios, he's been able to show he's been able to be in there for 15 minutes. But I think it's kind of a unique scenario here where I think Tyro's cardios look probably pretty good. He doesn't eat a lot of strikes and can probably lock them down on the ground. So I think people are playing into that a little bit too much, where I don't think there's as many parallels in some of those past matchups to Tyra here. That's just me, though.
Yeah, no, I agree, Luke. And I honestly think that's pretty important because I actually think amongst the questions there are about Tyra, I actually don't really think cardio is one. Like we saw about 8.5 minutes of grappling, 9 minutes of grappling in the Candelario fight, and he was still looking pretty dominant in the third round of that fight. I don't think Vergara provides much resistance. And you mentioned it, a lot of these guys gas out. Part of that is Vergara hits the body a lot, but like it's kind of hard to hit the body if you're being clinched up or on the ground. I'm with you 100% here. I think a lot of those considerations don't make a ton of sense. Moving on, we got an interesting one here though. We got Piero Rodriguez taking on Sam Hughes. Piero Rodriguez, I notably or notoriously or infamously unsuccessfully faded her big with Kay Hansen in her debut. My basic thought in that fight was Kay Hansen's a pretty good wrestler. She has some holes in it, but above average for WMA. I've seen Piera held down a bunch. If Hansen gets on top of her, she's going to control her. That did happen early, but it turned out Piera's actual takedown defense was a bit better than I thought. She ended up winning that fight and actually taking Kay down in the latter 2 rounds. Now she comes in here and she's only being priced slightly higher than she was against Hughes. I think minus 160 last time I saw her than she was against Hansen. And it's kind of interesting because Hughes is somebody who's been priced as a dumpster. Apologies to Sam Page. I love her. Obviously she cashed for me in her last fight against Louise Reed. But the truth is the market has treated Sam Hughes as pretty much a non-factor in this division up until this fight. And now it seems like everybody's all over her as a dog off her win against Elise Reed. The thing for me is like, go watch the Reed fight. She was losing the striking in that fight. She got on top of her, controlled her there, but Elise Reed's one of the worst defensive grapplers in the UFC in either men's or women's division. I still think there's some holes with Piero Rodriguez on the ground, but Kay Hansen went 2 for 8 on takedowns, and I'd rate Hansen's wrestling considerably higher than Hughes's. And so it's very hard for me to see Hughes manifesting the success that I thought Hansen could have here. And if that's the case, then it's like Hughes has to win this fight striking and with cage push. And my problem is Hughes is a decent boxer, but she's slow. She's not athletic. She's not very assertive. And on the other side, Rodriguez, I actually think is very athletic. She's very fast. She hits hard. So even if all things were equal here and they were striking with a similar total number of strikes, I would lean Piera pretty hard on power. And then you add in the fact that I think Rodriguez is a much better wrestler. I'm sure she can get takedowns here. Like Hughes' upside to me is like this is an even money fight, like in her best case scenario. Whereas on the Rodriguez side, her best case scenario is possibly minus 250, minus 300 range. I haven't bet Rodriguez. I would if it got down to like minus 125. I still have some of the same concerns I did with her, but I just don't see the Hughes upside here. Lags, what do you think?
So from a market perspective, I was just checking real quick on here. So Piera closed against Hansen, minus 115. And then for Hughes, closed about the same price she is now against Elise Reed. I don't think in general, I don't think Hughes is that great of a wrestler, to be quite honest. And in terms of the striking, she's fairly hittable. I think this is a good spot, like you mentioned on Piera. I just think the line's about right myself.
Luke, how about you? Any contrarian taker?
Yeah, I actually did. I played Hughes at plus 170.
All right.
I don't disagree with a lot of what you guys said. Honestly, I'm not a fan of really both girls at all. I think the Rodriguez girl is incredibly overrated. If you go back and watch her last 3 fights, she's evens going into the 3rd round in all of these fights. So she's not going out here and dumpstering anybody. Like even in her LFA fight, she's losing striking exchanges to a shitty jiu-jitsu girl. So, we can, in rounds and minutes, I should say. So is Sam Hughes anything special? No. But like I said, I have a benchmark in a relatively recent sample size of her losing stand-up minutes to a negative striker. And that's my thing with her. Like, she goes forward and does hit hard, but there's a ton of points in her fights where she doesn't throw, where she just kind of just stands there and like takes shots and like growls at girls. Like, it's like, I don't know. I feel like.
Well, let me ask you, Luke. So does the athleticism bother you at all? Because that was like when I was taping it, the one thing that stood out to me is it just seemed like there was a huge gap athleticism-wise between the two.
You mean like that Rodriguez is a much better athlete than her?
Yeah.
Potentially. I think she's honestly I think it's probably actually came down to fight IQ for her, where she's like, when the going's like, gotten closer tough, she's done what she's needed to do to win fights, which I think is encouraging for someone with only 8 pro fights. But with someone with only 8 pro fights, I think there comes additional variance. And like, I don't have any supreme degree of confidence in Hughes, but kind of with what you said, John, I do think Rodriguez should be a slight favorite in the fight, but I thought plus 170 was wide. Like, I think it's a fight that's probably going to be 1-1 going into 3 again, and it's going to be close and has split decision-y type of potential. And the one thing I will say for Hughes too, despite not looking great overall in the UFC, like, she came in on short notice to fight Tisha Torres, obviously got butchered, like, massive level fight. Even in her fight against Piero, she took that on like 8 days notice and, still had success minute to minute. It was really like Piero knocks her down or Piero lands a big judo throw. But like the actual margins minute to minute in that fight, I don't think were that large. She took a round off of Loma. And like, lastly, from a narrative perspective, I think it's interesting too that ever since the fight before the Reed fight, she left her like longtime camp and went down to Fortis, and she's talked about the fact that she was just in a horrible spot. She hated her coaches, she hated her training partner, she just didn't like ever really want to be there. And she's looked a lot better in her last 2 fights since moving down to a new camp. So she seems like she's in a better mindset and a better headspace. So to me, it's a low-level fight. Rodriguez has more to prove to me. I think it's close. So at plus 170, it's more of a play into the spot than spot and the number than me having any confidence in Hughes.
No, I mean, that's fair. I put Rodriguez around 60 to 65%, but like, I don't think if you put her at like 55%, I don't really think that's crazy. My baseline was fairly low on her coming into the UFC, but I think I probably have a higher baseline on Hansen than where the market did. And so like, I don't know, that impressed me. But like I said, I'm not really like, I'd play her at like minus 115, minus 125. I plus 170. I mean, that's way better than where the market is now. So I mean, I completely respect that. Moving on though. This is a garbage fight. We have Joe Anderson Burrito taking on Lucas Alexander. Kind of a bummer because I was going to play Burrito big against Baghdasaryan when that fight was originally booked. Obviously, it fell through. Lags, any take here?
So I guess I'll add real quick as the totals just dropped because I was looking all day. It's an under 1.5, and the under 1.5 has been taking some heat. It looks like it opened at minus 105. It's now minus 135 on Bet Online. I mean, Alexander's like a tall, rangy striker. I think his defensive grappling is a huge red flag, in my opinion. I think his grappling is a huge red flag, or his grappling, his cardio are huge red flags. I think it should be a solid spot for Burrito on short notice, quite frankly.
Luke, how about you?
Honestly, I didn't even know this fight was a thing until like this morning. So I know nothing about this Lucas Alexander guy. So I'm going to lean on you guys for this.
Yeah, more or less with Lags. Alexander, decent striker. Pretty poor gas tank, not a great grappler. Look, Burrito was the guy I faded in his first fight in the UFC, but honestly, he impressed me a bit against Algeo. Even on a low gas tank, held tough and was throwing volume late in that fight. Look, he's well-rounded, he's hittable, but he's a good boxer, hits with power, decent wrestler. Honestly, Alexander with a full camp, I'd still make Burrito a decent-sized favorite. The guy's shown to be gassy in the past, and now he's on a short camp here. I kind of think you got to roll with Burrito here. Mushroom in the chat saying Burrito ITD. We'll see what that looks like. I mean, I'm guessing it's going to be juice to the gills, but if it's not, I don't hate to look for it. I struggle to see Alexander presenting many issues unless Burrito just stands at range and gives him preferred fight, you know?
Yeah, I was hoping for an under 2.5, but that obviously didn't happen.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I'm happy to pass this. It should be a fun fight,
Yeah.
honestly, but no strong takes. Moving on, great fight here. One of my favorite on the card. We got Nick Maximov. He's taking on Jacob Malkoun. Luke, what do you think?
Honestly, no real strong opinion for me. I kind of came out on the side of me thinking that Maximov is probably the better wrestler, and I think his cardio is better. So I think the line around 60-ish or so percent, I think, is probably right. The problem I just really had in capping the fight is I just don't think there's a lot of benchmarks really to go off of, more so on the Malkoun side, where I guess here's another in the feather in the cap of Maximov and why I'm picking to win. We have seen him go out there and out wrestle more credentialed wrestlers than Malkoun, and yeah, I guess so. We don't necessarily have that, where obviously the wrestling components of Malkoun have came against not the greatest of wrestlers in the world. So, but at the same time, I'm not really willing to make the blanket statement that he can't have wrestling success on Maximov. And I also think there is a chance that we do see some more extended stand-up in this fight than maybe perceivably, which I think both guys' stand-up is very poor. So I wouldn't really have a strong opinion if they stand. So I think it's a pass. Honestly, I think probably just general anti-violence, though, is a pretty decent look. I don't think this fight finishes at much of a rate.
Yeah, I mean, I really like Maximov here, to be honest. Quite the opposite take. I mean, I agree broadly with what you said here. For me, I think Maximov's a superior wrestler to Malkoun. It's kind of interesting. I observed this earlier in the week. I think I was talking to maybe C about it. But, Malkoun basically just goes to kind of a high single leg and runs the pipe pretty well and gets takedowns that way. And it's kind of amazing watching him next to almost everybody else who tries to wrestle in MMA go for a single leg who just can't figure out something basic like running the pipe. And then you see how easy it is to get these 185 pounders down with it, I mean, granted, the guys Malkoun's out wrestling are largely poor wrestlers, but still, people just don't understand fundamental wrestling. And I think Malkoun's going to have a pretty decent career doing that. A guy who can pursue that kind of a process at 185 pounds is going to do well. He's going to win a lot of fights. Unfortunately, I just don't think this is it. I mean, Maximov was a college wrestler. You can see just in terms of, he obviously hasn't had to defend many takedowns in the UFC, but just in terms of like takedown diversity and athleticism, he has a lot more to offer than Malkoun has. I've seen Maximov on his back a couple times. He does a really good job working up. Granted, it's not like an extended sample, but the couple times I have, he shrimps, he works for an underhook, he backs to the fence, he doesn't accept bottom. Those are all things I really want to see. While the two times I've seen Malkoun end up on his back, he's kind of just laid there like a fish. And like one of my biggest pet peeves for grapplers are guys who, when their shoulders to the mat, they just lay flat with two shoulders down. It's like, you're not really working to get out of that position. That's, if you're just accepting that, you're probably not getting up. And so I just think in terms of the grappling, Maximov has a lot more upside for controlling him for extended periods of time here. As you touched on, Luke, obviously the two guys Maximov has beaten in the UFC are much more credentialed wrestlers. They're both very strong. And that's a huge thing for me is like Malkoun's a borderline 170 pounder. Maximov's a big dude. Like this guy went on Contenders on short notice, fought at heavyweight, weighed in at 200 pounds, gave away 60 pounds. Yeah, he struggled early in the fight, but eventually just out-grappled a man much bigger than him. Out-grappled and was able to muscle Brundage and Puna. And I kind of think people have this view of Maximov that he's not that strong, when the reality is he's out-grappling much stronger guys. And my gut is, I'm not 100% positive, but my gut is he's going to be way stronger than Malkoun is here, and he's going to toss him around. But to what Luke's point is here, I think it's very good that it is possible this ends up being more striking than what people are like considering. And I do sort of lean Malkoun in that realm, but the one thing I'll say is Maximov's 24 years old. He fights at a camp with a lot of good boxers. To me, Maximov has a lot of potential for like huge improvements, whereas I mean Malkoun could get better, but we've seen him fight more recently, and I don't think he's very good. Like I think the odds of Maximov being competitive or winning the striking are better personally than the odds of Malkoun winning the grappling here. I'm probably going to add to it. I took a bad number here at about minus 160. I'm probably going to add around where it is now, or if it keeps coming down. I put Maximov around 65% myself here. I think he's going to roll. Lags, what do you think?
So funny enough, I fall like right in between the lines of you're really Maximov and Luke's kind of like a little Max. I'm like right in the middle. I think still even like it's funny like you were saying the line's still coming in. I haven't bet it yet, but I think the line where it's at is warranted for a small play on Maximov. I think like you said, the striking is fairly close, but in terms of the grappling, I think Maximov is the better wrestler grappler here. The guy to more likely have top time. I think it's a good fight for him. Going to be a much bigger, larger guy as well, so. I think it's a good spot for him.
I'll say though, if it does keep coming in and the whole market pours in on Malkoun, I will play Maximov closer to evens.
I mean, you pretty much have to. Like, honestly, like a Diaz boy like you, not taking the American wrestler from a Diaz camp, wrestling an Australian wrestler here. Like, what is going on? You know?
Yeah, and it's actually funny too because during the 279 fight week, I actually ran into him and I met him for the first time. So yeah, it should just be a categorical homer Diaz brother, because I actually always have been and spoke higher on Maximov than actually most people have. It's just the dynamic of the fight's kind of weird to me.
Dude, this guy's out here posting Instagram Crone Gracie, man. Like this guy, he is going to roll this Aussie. I'm telling you. I'm just kidding, but I actually think Maximov upside is I think a lot of people look at him as an undeveloped prospect and someone without much of a future, but a guy who has the cardio that he has and can attempt takedowns at that rate, as we've seen with other undeveloped guys like Colby Covington, Murad, guys who have the process Maximov has, they don't need to round out the rest of their game that much to have, very high upside. So I'm fairly bullish on Maximov for his career, to be honest. Moving on, though, we were just chatting about this one. We got Rafael Assunção taking on Victor Henry. I'm just going to talk about it from a market perspective here briefly. Look, Henry's a huge favorite here. I don't really have a lot to contend with that. I understand the idea. Look great against Leone Barcelos. Rafa has looked fucking shot. I'm not going to say he's not. What I will say that I find odd is it's like Henry, the market thought Henry was 20% against Leone Barcelos. Obviously, Barcelos would be a favorite against Assunção and a decent-sized one. But they went from saying Henry should be 20% against Barcelos, which, again, obviously wrong. I'm not saying that's not true. That was obviously wrong. To now being a larger favorite against Assunção than Ricky Simón was. I mean, to me, like Ricky is a top 10 guy to me. Like I love Ricky. I've been pretty vocal about that on his podcast. He's a great wrestler. His striking's improving. Great athlete. Obviously, Henry is too, but Henry's 35. And honestly, I wasn't super impressed with his regional tape. It's just weird to me because the Barcelos fight came out of nowhere, and maybe that's the guy that he is. But I'll tell you this: he won that fight on volume, and he's fighting one of the best volume suppressors in history. Him being priced more than Simón seems crazy. I wouldn't bet Assunção here, but I will tell you this: I wouldn't be parlaying Victor Henry because I would not be shocked at all if you're looking at a fight that devolves into being a lot lower volume than you think, and maybe Assunção mixing and grappling. I don't know. I'm passing it. Lags, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an easy pass, to be quite honest with you. I mean, I think if Assunção threw a little bit more volume, I guess maybe there'd be some interest. But no, I mean, you touched on it. He looks washed as shit lately. Low volume. I think the volume is massively in Victor Henry's favor here. I think it should be a good spot for him.
Luke, how about you?
Yeah, this is definitely a spot that the books would have trapped me into betting Assunção like a year and a half ago, probably. But it's something I've really tried to address in my game where X's and O's wise, there's a very substantial argument for Assunção being value in this fight. Like there is. The guys went out there and competed and, against some of the best guys in the division, beat some of the best guys in the history of the division, right? But it's just like father time catches up to everybody. And I've also been vocal about the fact of not betting on aged Brazilians because it is honestly probably one of the most negative EV narrative things you can look at in this game. I generally feel that way. It just is. But to your point, I mean, that is kind of his career and being able to suppress volume. He's obviously shown largely elite level takedown defense. And that's the thing, even against the Simón, right? Obviously we know Ricky is an elite wrestler, but like, to me, that fight really evidently homers the fact that he's washed, because we've seen him go out there and stuff a ridiculous amount of shots from very, very high level wrestlers pretty much throughout the course of his career, like shut him down completely, and wasn't able to do that with Simone. Simone historically hasn't been the biggest power threat, was able to crack him. Obviously the Garbrandt loss hasn't aged particularly well at the same time, but to your guys' points with Henry, like, I had a parlay with Barcelos in that fight. Like, I didn't think much of him coming in, so it's kind of a weird spot for me where it's like I'm not really usually one to like just completely jump ship based on one fight. But the reality is very few guys have been able to go out there and do what he did to Jaime Barcelos, like in multiple different realms too.
So do you think though, it's like this is what, like, we all know Hayoni's a guy who loves to mix it up in the pocket. Like, it's kind of like my questions. It's like the volume Henry showed when he fought Kyler Phillips, who wouldn't stand in front of him, was very different than Barcelos. Like, do you think that's part of it?
Say that one more time. Sorry.
So like Henry regionally, I did not think of as this Max Holloway volume striker, right? But Barcelos is a guy who's happy to stand in front of you and kind of trade if you're going to bring it to him, Like, I do wonder if part of the volume was his willingness to stand in front of Barcelos,
That's definitely part of it, but I also think even with the game that Asensio has played, I think he was also a lot faster 4 or 5 years ago in terms of his counter. Like, even his footwork, like he was never like this phenomenal, footwork athlete speed guy, but he played in that game well, where I still think it obviously supplemented and related to success over a higher level of competition, where I think that speed is gone. I think that footwork has dropped significantly. I think his reactions to shots are, but listen, I'm not trying to tell anybody to lay 300 on Henry. I think it's just the definition of a pass play.
No, I completely agree with you. I've just, it's something I've kind of been challenging everybody with all week as someone who is passing the fight, just because it's like, I hear everybody just kind of this week nod their heads and be like, oh yeah, the line's right. And I'm just like, we were all saying minus 500 was right last fight. Are we sure the line's right? But I get it. And I agree with everything you said. Moving on though, we got Mana Martinez taking out Brandon Davis. I'll throw it to you, Lags. What do you got here?
Yeah, I think the under 2.5 is a great spot here, to be completely honest. I have a small play on that. I quite frankly, I don't think Brandon Davis can take a shot on the feet. I don't think he can mix up the grappling here. I think Mana comes forward, has solid pressure, solid power. I think he puts Davis out pretty early.
Luke, how about you?
I went into this one thinking I would bet Davis, and I actually am picking him to win, more so based on value, just because the reality is Mana Martinez has not looked good in any sort of extended fight he's really fought ever. He's only had 3 fights go past the 7.5 minute mark. And honestly, in the UFC, from the regionals, he was just this aggressive, go for it power puncher guy, but he goes and stands and does fucking nothing against Guido Canetti early on in that fight, essentially outside of one flurry, and obviously significantly struggled to track down, Ronnie Lawrence in that contest as well. Like, I just have serious questions of what his ability to win any sort of minutes or extended striking exchanges over people. And that's the thing where I think Davis is interesting, because I think he throws a lot of volume, but the problem with him is he gets into these like sparring like rhythms where he'll just kind of fuck around in there a little bit. And he'll just like eat jabs and stuff. Like, I don't know. Like, he's kind of always been a bit wishy-washy in that capacity. But to Lags' point, I don't really trust his durability at 35, even outside of the Baccarat fight. You go back to his fight with Kong and Costa, both fights that were down at 35 as well. He got significantly hurt in both of those fights too. So I think that's something that's really interesting to note. But I'm really not sold on the durability of Martinez either. I mean, getting dropped 3 times and a total of 28 distance strikes by a base wrestler. Yeah.
Who doesn't hit hard?
What's that?
Who doesn't hit hard? Ronnie doesn't hit hard.
No, and like my point in using that as a reference point, not just because it was the most recent thing, but because he's just knocked everybody out early pretty much throughout the course of his career. So it's like, is Mana Martinez a durable fighter? Because Guido Canetti doesn't throw strikes, really. he'll throw hard when he does, but he doesn't. And it's largely big body kicks or telegraphed overhands. So it's like, is Mana Martinez durable? I don't see why Brandon Davis couldn't knock this motherfucker out either. So I've heard people say like this is like a complete smash spot for Mana Martinez. I'm like, I don't know. Like, listen, Brandon Davis might not be able to take a shot, and I'd more so lean into that as well. But I'm saying if he can, and this fight extends, I think there's more merit to Brandon Davis in an extended fight of him being more value. But there's, like I said, there's also a real scenario. He comes out here, gets torched in 3 minutes, and Mana Martinez looks like an excellent play at 150. So I think it's going to be high action. I think it's going to be violent based on how both guys fight. I liked violence at plus money too.
Yeah, I have a small bit of the under as well. I'm with Luke. I'm with you. Like before I taped it, I was like, I'm going big on Brandon Davis here. Mana Martinez fucking sucks. Brandon Davis has fought so many guys competitively. And that's still kind of my view, you know? Like, if you told me Brandon Davis is going to be in there hopping around, like, looking like an athlete, I'd be like, okay, take my money. Brandon Davis money line, you know? The thing is, I made this mistake a couple weeks ago with Jesse Ronson. Brandon Davis looked like a fucking corpse when he came back to the UFC against the knockout. I know he had a knee injury, but, like, everything that was good about him was just gone. The volume wasn't there. He was always hittable, but he just seemed to have no movement and just be walking in cement. And as you touched on, Luke, we've seen this guy get hurt in just about every fight he's been in at 135 and get put out. And then I'm still thinking I'm going to bet him. I'm like, all right, he had knee surgery, whatever, he should be fine. But I'm looking at his Instagram, and I'm not normally an Instagram guy, but I see him in the same knee brace, like a month ago. And it's like, I did this with Jesse Ronson 2 weeks ago where I'm like, I don't care that he's 37 years old. It's fine. He's going to come out there. He had a bad performance. And no, he's still a corpse. I don't need to, Mana, I don't really rate at all, but he is a very young fighter who should, in theory, especially switching camps, be getting better fight to fight, and he does hit hard. I don't really need to go out there with a pre-bet on Brandon Davis on unknowns, coming off of looking truly horrendous against Danaa Bakaro. I am interested. Like, if Davis comes out there and looks closer to the guy that we saw in his earlier stint in the UFC, I'm interested in live betting him. But I don't need to fish with that. Like, Martinez could be getting better, and it's possible Davis is on the downswing in his career. I'm happy to see how Davis looks. I like the under. But I'm with you. Like, Davis, on paper, is the much better fighter here. It's just really a question of where is Brandon Davis? Like, to me, that's the entire question of this fight. And I don't know. So we'll see. Moving on, though. God, weird one here. We got Misha Sakurov. He's taking on Alonzo Menafield. Luke, what are your thoughts here?
Another really weird fight to me. Both obviously not the most trustworthy candidates out there. So automatically you see Menafield at like minus, I don't know, what is he, like -2 something or whatever now?
220.
He is 225 on FanDuel, 205 on DraftKings. Yep.
Yeah, and it just, my thing with Menafield, like, based on legitimately the guy's whole career, he is not a guy I'm laying over 2-1 on. Like, I can't do it. Like, mainly for like the William Knight fight and like the OSP fight. Like, yeah, the guy obviously has shown aggressive tendencies and will go out there and kill people, and that's honestly kind of what I think is going to happen here. But there's like other fights like the OSP fight and like the William Knight fight where he just doesn't do anything, or the Clark fight, which is honestly what gives me some potential merit to Serkinov here, where if he gets stuck in some bullshit clinch battle type of thing, coupled with the fact that we've seen Menafield on his back very little, and I think Serkinov is a better submission grappler, so should he be able to get on top of Menafield, I think shit could get very interesting for Mr. Menafield there. At the same time, we've seen Serkinov finished on bottom multiple times now too, so I guess theoretically Menafield could do something, but I'm more so on the side of Menafield goes out there and nukes him. I just don't trust the durability of Misha. I know he's going back up now, which that could be better from him, or in the sense that he doesn't have the weight cuts anymore, but I mean, Menafield still hits really hard, man. I think he's a better athlete. He's still a little bit more proven over end distance in comparison to Misha, who's incredibly front loaded, I would say. So, yeah, I think Menafield deserves to be a favorite. Am I running to lay 220 on it? Fuck no. I did consider the under 1.5, but the pause I have there is I think that Misha could just slow this turns into a clinch battle, or Metafield. It's one of those fights where Metafield just doesn't want to throw strikes. And then I'm like, okay, well, I have multiple reference points of where both of these, this under could have potentially went wrong, and it does go wrong. So, but I'm more so on the side of an early Metafield knockout.
I mean, I've never hid the fact that I do not like Alonzo Menifield as a fighter in the UFC. But I did say to both of you guys before we got on here, and again, I'm not betting it. I am not laying minus 225 on Alonzo Menifield. Let me be clear. I do have like this feeling that he might be like big value here. The thing that I keep going back to, I think, Luke, I think most of the points you touched on are very accurate. And I also think both of these guys are like very much confidence-based fighters. Like you see Menifield, generally things go downhill from him when he can't do what he wants to do in fights. You see the same thing with Serkinov. The thing is, like Misha, in terms of striking, is never confident, like ever, like, pretty much ever. So it's like everything for him comes down to his grappling and can he get that going. And honestly, Misha showed a lot of explosion early in his career in his wrestling, but we just haven't seen that lately. The guy went down to 85 and was struggling to be physically assertive at 185 pounds over a couple of fights. I have a lot of issues with Menifield. I don't think he's very good at MMA, but he is a good athlete. He has very good hips and he's very strong. Devin Clark, I think, went 1 for 13 on takedowns, and I would say Devin Clark, a guy who has fought at heavyweight, by the way, is a better wrestler than Misha Serkunov, which isn't to say Serkunov could not take him down. Obviously, he could, but I don't think it's going to be easy. And I think once, Luke, you touched on it, Serkunov probably very front-loaded. As Serkunov starts to get discouraged, this probably becomes increasingly at range, and I think Menifield just takes his head off, personally. But again, I don't really rate a lot of what Menifield does. I just think he's a fairly wide gap striking. If he ever does go back to the calf kicks he showed off in the Herman fight, I think it's an element of his game that, Serkunov and a lot of light heavyweights can't really compete with. Not that I think Menifield's going anywhere at light heavyweight. Again, to be clear, my view has not really changed. But I mean, Serkunov has to get into the mat here. Is it possible? Sure. Is it likely? I don't really think so. Lads, what do you think?
Yeah, I think Menifield dead some early, quite frankly. I was quite shocked that the under 1.5 was minus 105. So I have a unit and a half on that, quite frankly. I think Menifield dead some early. I think Serkinov
is that still where it is?
I believe it's minus 130, minus 122, minus 130 on some spots.
It's not horrible. Minus 105 is a lot more appetizing than that, but yeah.
Yeah, but quite frankly, Serkinov doesn't have the gas tank. I think Menifield's power is just too much here. So, yeah.
I mean, Menifield doesn't really have the gas tank either, but yeah. I mean, I don't disagree. It's probably ending early. Moving on, though, after that shit show. We got
another shit show.
This is a beautiful disaster of a fight. Imagine not liking this card with Dusko Todorovic fighting Jordan Wright. Come on, Legs, take it away. What do you got here?
Yep, another fight where I think it ends early. Got 2 units on the under 1.5, minus 160. Beverly Hills Ninja, just a guy that comes out there trying to cause violence early, but doesn't have striking defense. He's got decent power, don't get me wrong, but it's funny enough to like Dusko's another guy, doesn't have defense, has big power as well. I think largely, to be honest with you, I think there's some merit to Wright a little bit early, but like I think one of these guys gets knocked out early. I much prefer the under 1.5.
Luke, how about you?
Yeah, I'm not completely counting out Wright here just because he's going to go aggro and throw big power shots, and I don't really trust the defense and durability of Dusko. Like, I mean, he will go out there and avoid a lot of shots, but like his defense hasn't evolved at all. It's still the same like movement, hands down type of thing. Like I'm leaning back for shots. Like Wright could clip him with a head kick or a big hook or something. If it's just going to get chaotic like that, I really wouldn't be that surprised. At the same time, I have been vocal about that Jordan Wright is one of the worst fighters on the UFC roster. I do think Dusko is much more skilled. He has more paths to victory. It is really a spot that he should go out there and show out. My just opinion with him has just fluctuated so much over the last 2 to 3 years. I don't know. And he honestly has not been a profitable back for me long term, but I think the under 1.5, I know that's kind of the public play of the week, but I think it makes complete sense. Jordan Wright's never been past that mark before. Both guys largely perennial finishers. And I think what's also interesting too is that, Dusko, he's went out there and implemented obviously grappling a little bit in the UFC too. And he's went and pounded guys out on the floor. And with Wright getting, guillotined by Marc-Andre Barrio, where he legitimately just stuck his head there and left it there for like 45 seconds. And then Barrio's like, yeah, I think I'm going to try this. and he does, and he fucking gets it. It kind of reminded me of the, maybe not as quickly, but the Cowboy Oliveira and Shavkat Rakhmonov situation where he just, there you go, buddy. Take it. It's like, what a fucking idiot. I'm sorry. Yeah, somebody should go out here. It should be Dusko.
What if? Let me offer you guys an alternative vision into the future. What if you went with the over and the goes the distance in this fight? I know it speaks. I haven't bet them, but I am thinking about it. It speaks completely contrary to the fighter that Jordan Wright is throughout his entire career. But hear me out here. Like, I know Jordan Wright has never made it past the 1.5 round mark in his career. I do understand that. But his entire run up to the UFC, Alaska FC guys, they're all, like, we all know Alaska FC. It's like an ongoing joke on Twitter. It's the worst regional promotion there is in the world. Can't take that too seriously. Gets knocked out by Fluffy Hernandez. Obviously, he's gotten his head put in the third row a couple times in the UFC. But I don't know. Like, Dusko doesn't really profile as like one of the guys who's knocked him out. Like, you look at like Fluffy, Buckley, Silva. These are guys who are going to bite down in the pocket and swing. Like, that's not really, Dusko will box with him, but his game isn't historically to get in the pocket and really swing with you. He likes to cage push guys. Like, lately, he's liked to wrestle, as has Wright. And don't get me wrong, if Marc-Andre Barrio can jump on a guillotine, surely Dusko can too, and Dusko can submit him. But I don't know. I just have this feeling that these guys, Wright may come aggressive, but that really hasn't been like Dusko's MO throughout his career. Like, I really just kind of have a feeling that there's a decent chance these guys end up like clinching a lot, which could obviously lead to a finish. But I'm not passionate about it, but like I kind of feel like under 1.5 should be like minus 150 personally. Like it's hard for me to put like a big number on it just because I do think there is a chance that, you have a guy in Dusko who loves to clinch and a guy in Wright who's been trying to grapple and clinch more lately. Like, what if that just happens and they do that for 8 to 10 to 12 minutes? Like, that seems in play to me. I could be wrong, and if I bet it, I'm sure Jordan Wright will come out here and just get his head knocked off again. And Dusko does have some KOs regionally. Like, I do think Dusko hits hard enough to knock out Wright. My point is more, though, like, like, you look at, like, Buckley was, like, stalking him like a panther, and, like, trying to take his head off. Hernandez literally just blitzed him and took him out. Silva, the first time he entered the pocket, was happy to let his hands go. That's not really Dusko's game, but again, just food for thought. If over 1.5 gets over plus 200, I'll take a small poke at it. It's not like the most passionate take ever. Luke, hit me with it.
I will say for Dusko, at least in relation to power, he did knock out Ferrara right before the UFC, who's a very mobile guy too, who's much more mobile than I would say Jordan Wright. So
he did. I do think he can crack a bit. I just more mean like I don't think this is going to be something where, like, if someone dies, it's probably going to be instantaneous. I don't think you're going to see these guys throw 200 strikes in 7 minutes. That's really more what I'm getting at. But we'll see what happens. Moving on. Askarov, Brandon Royval. I took some early Askarov here. I had minus 175. Where the line is now, I'm not like very passionate about it. I think it's moving towards right. I personally put Askarov around minus 300. I wouldn't bet it here personally, but I will say this. I know it sounds like I'm pretty biased here because of how anti-Royval I've been over the years. But the truth of the matter is, to me, this really comes down to a math thing. Like, I see people saying, Royval plus 200, you have to poke him. He creates chaos. And I mean, here's a stat for you. Every guy that's attempted a takedown against Brandon Royval has controlled him for more than 50% of that fight. We saw this guy get mauled by Casey Kenny, who, he comes from a wrestling background, but not really an MMA wrestler. Comes to the UFC. Tim Elliott takes him down at will. Elliott, not really a guy who consolidates position, eventually gets subbed. We see Pantoja basically rip through him in the grappling, eventually sub him. Brandon Moreno, same thing. He does get hurt, but after he gets controlled for about 3.5 minutes in the first round. Last fight, Bontarin, 7.5 minutes of control in a 15-minute fight. This is a guy who is dead gassed out, taking him down in round 3 and laying on top. I get all the arguments about Royval being an agent of chaos, and they're not incorrect. If they're on the feet, Royval could sting him. He could land a spinning elbow or a flying knee. But the truth is, this guy has zero takedown defense. He doesn't. I keep hearing people talking about it scrambling, and it's he's not creating space. He's kind of just flopping around and trying to Grammy roll. You look at Bontarin, when he got on top, he was just okay, I'm going to go chest to chest. And Royval was just okay, I have nowhere to go. That is literally what happened in that fight. You look at Askarov, he's fought guys who actually do scramble very well. Pantoja came out at Askarov at 100 miles an hour and got nowhere near subbing him and ended up getting out of control. Askarov and Moreno went to a draw. Went back and forth grappling, pretty even that entire fight. Moreno's a much better grappler than Royval is. Askarov owned Benavidez in the grappling, took him down 5 times. Benavidez is historically one of the best scramblers in the UFC, and people can say what they want about where Benavidez was his career at that point. Grappling is the last thing to go, and we hadn't seen any hints of Benavidez grappling ability going. I keep hearing the cardio things he slowed down against Kai Kara France. Yeah, he went 1 for 14 in takedowns against Kai. Missing takedowns is way harder than getting them, and on top of which, people say that, but they leave out the part that there were multiple people in the media who scored the fight for Askarov. Round 3 was really close to the last minute of that fight, even though he wasn't able to get Kara France down. So it's I have a guy who cannot defend takedowns, who plays guard and tries to flop around on his back against a guy who actually has a very heavy top game, who has a good control grappling game, who's very unlikely to get subbed from top position, who probably will take his back at will and can theoretically sub him. Askarov's the best wrestler he's faced in his career. Even on the feet, yeah, Royval's got better volume. You have to favor him there. But Askarov's probably the better technical striker here, too. You cannot tell me that a guy that defends takedowns at 39% and plays guard against a guy at Askarov's level of grappling wins this fight 1 in 3 times. That just doesn't make sense. I think Askarov minus 300 is conservative. You're building, and I think that prices in a lot of Royval's ability to finish this fight because he can finish the fight. That's how Royval wins fights against guys like Askarov. But I don't really think he's offering much on minutes here. I think, the takes that Royval could win a decision are fucking ludicrous here. Maybe I'll be wrong, but I'm pretty confident I know what's going to happen in this fight in grappling exchanges. We'll see. I like Askarov here. What do you think, Legs?
Kind of what you just ended with there. He's not a great minute winner, and I don't really see how he's going to win the majority of the minutes here. I think Askarov owns him in the grappling. He's a bad defensive grappler. It's pretty cut and dry, quite frankly. Just no interest in this current number. So.
Yeah, I mean, minus 270 is big. Luke, what do you think?
Yep.
Yeah, I think you broke it down pretty well. So I don't want to rehash everything, but I just lost my complete train of thought. Yeah, I guess my hot take for the fight is, and I know a lot of people will disagree with me on this, I think Askarov is much more live to finish Royval than the other way around. I know he hasn't finished anybody in the UFC, but he's gotten to people's backs multiple times. Royval is pretty reliable to put himself in bad spots. I think that's also key and something that people are missing here because people are just I think people are looking at this fight very simplistic and snarky in the sense that they're oh, he just moves on bottom. He's a noodle and he's gonna do shit as if that's going to be easy to do against a guy like Askarov, where if he's going to sit there and give his back without Askarov even really having to do things to get there, well, Askarov's going to take it. He's going to lock him down. He's going to control him for multiple minutes. And I think he subs him. I think he submits Brandon Royval in this fight. I don't know why that's so far-fetched when you look. Like I said, the guy's gotten submitted before. He's been finished on bottom. He's been put in a bunch of bad spots. I think Askarov is one of the best wrestler-grappler combo archetypes that Royval spot. And like even on the feet, yeah, you have to give Royval like volume advantages, but in general, Askarov suppresses volume pretty well, and he's hurt multiple guys too. He essentially knocked Tim Elliott out and still stayed conscious somehow. You know, he cracked Joe B pretty good in their fight. So I don't really think this is like one-way traffic on the feet. And I also think it's interesting that, you know, Askarov was like a minus 400 favorite against Kara France or whatever. So obviously he's still chalky here, but I'm more so speaking to, I bet him at minus 190. I probably wouldn't play him kind of where it is now, but I think it's a market overcorrection spot, at least in relation to where I played it. To get him under minus 200, I think there's some recency bias there, and people love Royval. And like I said, I get it. The guy's got the nickname of the Raw Dog. He is the type of fighter you probably want to back in a lot of spots as an undervalued dog. But people, like I said, I think they're looking at it with like these blinders on and really are not contextualizing the matchup of how pretty much horrible of a style matchup that Askarov is for him in multiple realms. So I think people are pitching their money away on Royval. I like Askarov.
Yeah, I was just saying last thing real quick before you, John, is I think a lot of people are taking a lot from both of their last two fights, the Kaikar France fight and the Bontarin fight, quite frankly, in terms of the grappling.
The thing is, like, I think you have to price in to say, like, Royval should be better than plus 200. Like, Askarov gassing bad at an alarmingly high clip. You know, like, there's no... Like, what does a Royval decision look like? The Bontarin fight? Like, Askarov is a much more assertive grappler than Bontarin is. He's not going to sit there while Royval throws 40 air punches, you know, and do nothing. We'll see. But, I mean, we'll see what happens. I think Askarov's going to absolutely own him, though, to be really honest with you guys. Moving on, we had a pretty interesting co-main event here. Luke, I'll start with you. I don't know if you have any hot takes here. I don't really. It's Jonathan Martinez, it's Cub Swanson. Jonathan Martinez, decent-sized favorite against a legend.
Honestly, what's keeping me off of Cub is the 135 thing. Like, so I'm not a big narrative guy, but for a guy that has not fought at this weight class since 2005 at 38 years old, I don't think that can be just glossed over. Like, maybe he is fine, right? But I would say in the aggregate, guys in the lighter weight classes, aka not Jose Aldo, largely, pretty much people who drop, you know, at these stages in their careers, it tends not to go well more often than not. And honestly, we still have, unless something else came out that you guys know, did he give a reason as to why he's he's looked good at 145 recently. So I guess that's one other massive question. Like, what's the reason for the move? Obviously Martinez has had his struggles making 135 himself too. But I mean, X's and O's wise, if I didn't have this significant concern about this weight cut for Cub and what he's going to look like, I would happily play him at this number, to be honest, just because, to use your term, John, he's an agent of chaos. Martinez needs pretty range kickboxing type of fights to look good, and Cub's largely pretty good about taking that away. I think we all backed him against Giga, and obviously he got kicked in the stomach, which is of concern here. I still think that fight plays out very differently if that does not happen, which it would be interesting if that did happen to also see where the benchmark on this price tag would be, because I think it's probably the closest one you could make style-wise. But I've generally been a fan of Jonathan Martinez, but he just gets really lazy at points in his fights. Like, Cub hits hard, man. Historically, Cub's been pretty durable. Usually he's struggling on the mat with, you know, getting subbed and better grapplers, but Martinez has shown very little willingness to wrestle, has very little submission upside. It's just one of those spots where if I didn't have the concerns, I'd be happy to play Cub, but I still think there's a better chance for Cub to probably look better than his number than Martinez is in this style dynamic personally. So I do think it's 100% a dog or pass, but if Cub goes out there looking like shit, especially what he just did in the media day, he's got a guy fucking translating for him because he doesn't even want to speak, because that's just not a good sign to really begin with there. So it's narrative for me. but I think it is probably a dog or pass situation at the number.
I mean, I agree it's a dog or pass situation, but I'm kind of with you. It's like you look at Cubs' last 3 fights; they've played out what over 2 years now, about 2.5 years in that neighborhood. Um, it's the Elkins fight, which was over very quickly. He knocked it out, looked fine there, but also, if we're being honest, Aaron Elkins pretty made to order for Cub Swanson. The Giga fight over in a minute, and then before that, you had Daniel Pineda, and he won that fight. Looked okay, but had some dicey moments early in that fight dealing with the leg kicks there, for being honest, before Daniel Pineda did what Daniel Pineda tends to do when he faces adversity. But yeah, I mean, I love Cub Swanson. Like, he's obviously, I think we'd all agree, like, peak Cub, if we knew it was a normal and healthy weight, absolutely carves up Jonathan Martinez. But the guy's 38 years old. He's barely fought. The recent data samples we have of him are fairly small. Now he's going to 135 at 38, which is like, it's like an extra 7% of your body weight you're cutting down. Like, that's a huge amount of weight he's taking off here. And as you said, Luke, that rarely goes well. Am I jumping to play Martinez? No. I mean, I think Cub is generally the better fighter, but we have to acknowledge the fact that he is certainly a fighter on the back end of his career. Martinez is someone who might be getting better, and if not getting better, is at least his physical apex right now. With all that said, it's definitely cover pass. You're playing a money line. I can't imagine laying minus 210 on Jonathan Martinez. Something I do think kind of interesting. I'm looking at this now. I'm seeing like under 2.5, like plus 130. These boys are going to throw down. Like, you go look at Cubs' last 2 fights that went to a decision. He landed like over 120 significant strikes in each. We have seen Martinez chin checked, hurt, and finished a few times. Cub, we've obviously seen finish, and if he is deteriorated, the volume here is going to be very, very high. I kind of like the under. So, I mean, what do you think, Lags?
So I originally was going into this thinking what you thought. I was thinking about the under, and then what kind of gives me some pauses. Martinez kind of fights a little bit more safe and a little bit calculated, I guess, since that Davey Grant fight. So to me, I'm more so like passing, because I think not to disagree. Like, I think Jonathan Martinez can get hurt, but I think it's more a product of Cub getting hurt and finished in this spot for the under, just personally. So yeah, it's a pass for me. But I did find the article looking about the weight drop. So it was literally December of 2021. It was after he beat Elkins. He said, I talked maybe about dropping to 135 just to switch it up, try something new. I know I can make it, is all he said.
What kind of fucking reason is that?
I know I can make it.
Now we find out that he's taking the fight at 135. So
favorite or pass now? I switch my. I'm just kidding.
I mean, that is not that. I mean, look, I don't want to put too much stock in an interview, but like, I know I can make it. It's not encouraging. That's all. That's all.
With what we just saw today, too, and it's only Wednesday.
Dude, this guy could be seeing like little creatures for all we know right now. He's so like, delirious. We have no idea what's happening.
Watch them both miss weight. It will be fucking hilarious.
They do a 140 catch weight.
I saw Magic tweet something that was like, watch Cub like a professional kill himself today and come in at 136, and Jonathan Martinez comfortably come in at 139. Which I thought perfectly explained this situation. Anyway, moving on. It is possible. It is definitely possible. We had a good fight here. In terms of like women's main events, I think on paper it's probably one of the better ones we got. But Alexa Grasso taking on Viviane Araujo. Grasso minus 227 on Bet Online. The comeback plus 192 on Araujo. Lags, what do you think here?
We were talking about it earlier today, John. I think it's kind of interesting because to me, I do think there's a little bit of value on Araujo, but it's more so like I think you kind of have to project her to win the first 3 rounds to say that because her cardio is that bad. So that's where I come down on this fight. I think Vivi's cardio isn't that great. I do think she can get grappling and wrestling going early. I think the striking is fairly competitive early, but I think the cardio is just such a big, massive red flag.
Luke, what do you think?
You guys got me?
I got you. Yeah.
Sorry, my computer just froze up for 2 seconds.
No, you're good.
You're good.
Yeah. Okay. So if this was a 3-round fight and you were giving me like Araujo plus 200, I would probably take the shot. But honestly, I played Grasso at minus 185 because of the 5-round nature. I know it's kind of like the main talking point, but like I think it's categorically warranted. Like a girl in Grasso whose defensive wrestling and grappling has improved exponentially. So even if Araujo is able to have early wrestling success, Grasso is going to make her work tooth and nail to keep her there. So I don't think that's optimistic for the gas tank of Araujo from a wrestling perspective, coupled with the fact that Grasso is going to relentlessly throw strikes, who's also an incredibly effective counter striker, where we see these fights, obviously, for Vivi when she starts to slow. Like when she's fresh, she's bouncing around. Her footwork is much better. There's a lot more snap on her shots, but it's right around the halfway mark of multiple fights where that footwork completely disappears. She becomes more slow. As a result, she becomes more hittable. And girls have been able to, take over. And I understand she looked better in the Andrea Lee fight, but from a cardio perspective, still was very tired. I think that was more of a product of Andrea Lee was just more tired than she was. And so Araujo was able to lean on her takedowns to bail her out in that scenario. I don't really think that's a path here. And so, yeah, I think Araujo's best opportunities to win are in the early rounds, but the notion that Araujo's a lock to win 1 and 2, I think is complete bullshit at the same time. And I guess you could flip it on the other side and say, so Luke, Grasso's a lock to win 4 and 5. Not necessarily, but I have a lot more ground to stand on. Not she hasn't fought in a 5-round fight, but there's more ground to stand on that her cardio is much better and it sustains much better over the course of 15 minutes. So yeah, it's more of a play into a fade on the Vivi cardio. She's not a fighter that's built for 5 rounds. She's never shown any evolution in that capacity in 3-round fights, in my opinion. So, and I think we're seeing just Grasso incrementally improve fight to fight over like the last 2 to 3 years. So, but I am a Vivi fan. I like Vivi, but 5 rounds is not for her. So I was willing to back that opinion with cash and jump on Grasso.
Yeah, fair. I don't have like a whole. I think everybody in the market kind of knows the take on this fight, right? It's like Vivi's competitive early, gas tank likely fails her late here, and I don't really oppose that view too much. I guess. I guess what I'm wondering is, I feel like a lot of that's priced into the market, especially where it is right now. And so the question that I keep asking is like, well, what's not priced into the market here? And I agree with you, Luke. Like, I don't really. I do think Vivi can get takedowns here. I'm pretty positive she can get them. I don't think she'll have an easy time handling Grasso on the mat. Might have an okay time with it early in the fight, but the later it goes, she won't. But I mean, there is some upside there, and I do agree with you that early in this fight, I don't think Vivi's a lock either. The one thing that kind of sticks out to me that I think could be interesting is I actually think Vivi could have a lot of success calf kicking Grasso here. And I don't know if Vivi actually sticks to that game plan and sticks to it hard and just goes after it aggressively. We don't know how that's going to affect Grasso. Like, no, she hasn't faced a calf kicker like Vivi has. No one really has. And to be clear, again, I'm not like disagreeing with favoring Grasso. I do. I agree with everything you guys said. It's just more like, that to me is a variable in this fight that could potentially change how this looks down the stretch. Beyond that, honestly, if Vivi had done a better job separating herself on minutes when she fought lesser opposition, I think I'd be okay with taking a poke here because I do think the grappling is enough that it's like, even gassed out Vivi could weasel around her too late via grappling, even though I expect Grasso to get up. The problem for me is it's like I've touched on this every time we've broken Vivi down. Like I like her as well, but you even look at Montana De La Rosa outlanded her distance. This is a woman who's just her defense doesn't really exist. When she enters the pocket, she tends to get hit just as often as she's hitting opponents. And most of the time that's fine because she hits harder than them. But this is a time where it's like Grasso's counter ability, first of all, I think is better than Vivi's is. Her timing is better than Vivi's is. And, Vivi is used to having the WMA cheat code of physicality, whereas Grasso also has a fair amount of physicality herself. And so, if I thought Vivi had the ability to kind of separate a bit or could maybe operate in space okay, and at least minimize exchanges late in this fight, I would actually have a lot of interest in her here because it's I know she's the better grappler. I expect Grasso to be able to work up, but I know Vivi is the better grappler. But I don't think she can minimize exchanges, and that's the problem. Because if I don't trust her to be able to just blanket her late in this fight, and I think Grasso is going to be able to initiate exchanges, it's really hard to, not to see many outs. I could see Vivi winning the fight. It's just hard to see her winning it better than the implied line. So I guess ultimately where I come down is the line's about right here. I think the leg kicks are interesting. Vivi maybe having big grappling success early is interesting. But ultimately, it's a pass for me. Under is kind of interesting just because of the gas tank dynamic, and it's a big plus number. But I don't know. What do you guys think of that? Any interest in the under?
Well, my I should say lack of success in WMMA 5-round fights. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Not one I'd be clamoring to play personally.
Yeah.
As more of a being on the heavy Grasso truth crowd this week, I think Grasso can finish in the later rounds. I mean, look at the third round against Caitlin Chukagian for Araujo. She was getting her fucking ass whooped. She had no answer to virtually anything that was coming back at her. And if Grasso is just relentlessly pounding on her, I mean, even late, this also might be a hot take. I think Grasso might have some wrestling upside. If Vivi's completely exhausted and she's just boxing her up, Grasso could find her way to top. Or if Vivi is tired and she is able to land a reactionary takedown, Grasso could sweep her. She landed that really nice sweep against Macy Barber. I think it's possible. Like I said, that's more of a argument more so to late than anything early, which is why, if anything, I'd be more inclined to take a fight doesn't go the distance and really give myself an extra 2.5 minutes. But I think Grasso could get her out late.
Yeah, I think the Chuk fight is kind of what sticks in my brain and pushes me away from the Araujo bet, to be honest. Like you touched on, I mean, that was one-way traffic down the stretch in that fight. And it's just, it's like if you bet Araujo plus 185 and 11 minutes into the fight, she looks like that. It's just okay, well, should have been plus 300. I'm going to rip my ticket up now, But we'll see. I am excited for it. I think it's going to be entertaining. So, and it's a pretty good card. So I'm excited for it. We'll see what happens. Guys, we will be 7 p.m. next week. Is that right, Luke? Are we going an hour earlier? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. From now on, guys, we're going to be doing 7 p.m. Eastern time, Wednesday nights, moving things up a bit for everybody, for the kids, the parents. It's going to be fun. We're going to try to switch things up a little bit each week. Thanks for coming out, guys. We really appreciate it. As usual, you got me, John, and MMA Fox, Lags at Danny_Lags, and Luke at SWR_betting. Boys, next week at UFC 280, maybe the card of the year. We're shipping Islam big. Thanks, guys. Take it easy. Good luck on your bets this weekend. Later.